Hi, this is Jenny from the Sewing Palace in Helena, Montana, and today I'm going to show you a couple tips and tricks for our Saturday sampler quilt. It's featured from the book Double Dozen, so come on over and take a look. Here is the book. It's written by Kaye, and it's a wonderful book to learn basic quilt piecing and do lots of fun different quilting techniques. We're doing this as a month at a time, and this is the first month. So we're starting off with the first block called Good Cheer. So right here is the block, and this quilt is wonderful because it's set on point. So you have the option to add additional blocks, like these 6-inch blocks. They form a border around the whole thing, or you can just do the 12-inch blocks. So when you're looking at this block here, we have a dark fabric, another dark fabric. This is a light fabric, or a medium actually. That one's called a medium, and then this one's a light. So that's the way that that block is broken down. We have it in two colorways. One is traditional, which is what you're looking at, and then we also have another colorway which is called Kaye, and this is a designer from Westminster, and he designs beautiful, gorgeous fabrics. And so we have a bright, contemporary, modern, or a traditional. So let's just take a breakdown of this block, and I'll show you it in the book. So this book is a very wonderful book. It has the layout for the quilt on point with the 6-inch blocks. I'll flip it over and show you some other options. There's a layout here of just doing the 12-inch blocks on point, and that's just using 9 of them. We are going to be doing 12 when we do this course. And then this is another layout where it's not on point and the 6-inch blocks are integrated into the quilt, and then you add a big border around that. So a couple of options for layout. Again, it's Double Dozen by Kaye, and it's got all of the basics for how to do quilting and how to sew your quilt together when it's on point, how to make different units. So there's different units called flying geese, half square triangles, and quarter square triangles. And we're also going to be talking today about a 4-patch. So if I flip over, you're going to be seeing our first block, and it's called Good Cheer. And Good Cheer, this block is laid out very simple. It's got some simple units in it, but I'm going to show you a couple of tricks. It's also in grayscale, so when you're looking at this picture, you can see where the darks, the mediums, and the lights are very easily. And then when you look over to the other side, she'll show it a little more broken down with labels for what you're going to be cutting. I have made a couple of changes on cutting because I'm going to show you a couple shortcuts. So I'll show you a couple ways to make this unit. So if you're looking at the block, I have it in several colorways. This is one of the Kaye colorways. And when you're looking at it, in the corners you have units that are a set of 4, and those are called 4-patch units. So 4-patch units can be sewn in little squares. You cut the little squares and you sew square to square, square to square, and then you sew that together. You can also sew it in strip sets, so that's what I'm going to be showing you. This right here is a flying geese unit, and I'm going to show you how to make those 4 at a time. When you look at your block, we actually need 4 in all the corners there, or the sides, so we might as well just make 4 and be more efficient. And then this is a medium fabric. It's just a rectangle that's cut. This is a basic square, and then this is a connector unit, or a flying geese unit, that has a little more length to it. So I'm going to show you the connectors, the 4-patch units, and the flying geese, and then how to sew it all together. So let's get started with just the 4-patch units. Like I said, you can cut them all up and sew them individually square by square, or you could cut strips and then make them a little bit faster. So when you cut strips, these squares are cut 2 inches. So you would need 2 strip sets that are 2 inches long, or 2 inches wide, and then to determine the length, this would be 2 inches plus 2 inches, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. So I need 16 inches in length for the light and the dark. So I usually cut it a little extra, maybe 17 inches long, so 2 by 17. Then you will take those 2 fabrics and lay them right sides together. and you'll sew 1/4 inch. So I'm going to do that over here just to show you kind of how to line them up. So I have 1/4 inch foot, and I'm sewing on a Bernina 330, and I'm going to line up those fabrics right sides together and just sew along the edge so that I get 1/4 inch. You don't want extra fabric hanging off the edge. You don't want it inside. You want it right along the edge, and with 1/4 inch foot, it's right even with that edge. You also have a mark on the base of the machine. You have a mark out on the table that can help you guide those. You can pin this, but I usually don't pin. I'll just take my time and sew 1/4 inch. So once you get that whole strip set sewn, you'll have something that looks like this. This one's a little shorter because I've been cutting from it. So once you have that strip set sewn, you'll want to press it, and generally you want to press that towards the dark. So I will lay this flat. I'll get my handy iron and I'll press it, and then flip over the dark and press that. Now when you press that, you really want to just hold it instead of wobbling back and forth, because you can get some waves in your fabric. So you want to try to keep that as straight as possible. Once you're done with that, you're going to cut units that are 2 inches wide. So these units came out of here, and you're going to cut those units 2 inches wide. So let me just slide this aside and show you just a little trick with the cutting. So here I am with my strip set, and I've got a Creative Grids ruler here, and it's 6.5 inches wide. It's got these lines going this way and obviously the other way. So what I do first is I'll line up a line along the seam, and I'll trim off the little bit of excess. That way I'm trimming even from the seam and it's straight. Then I'll come over and I'll measure to the 2 inch mark, so 1, 2, and keep that right on the seam and cut my units. And then just work my way down until I have enough units. And once I do, I'm going to lay these like so. I've pressed it towards the dark, and I'll sew 1/4 inch seam along there, so you'll end up with a unit that looks like that. Okay, so those are the 4-patch units. They go in the corners, and I'll just bring my block right over here so you can kind of see where those are at. So when those are laid in the corners, you want them to form kind of a diagonal line. So you just want to be careful not to twist those and get it so that the darks are in the wrong position if you want that diagonal line to really pop out. So those are your 4-patch units. These right here are your medium fabric. If you're looking at the traditional colorway, that's a darker cream. And they're cut 2 inches by 3.5. So they're pretty simple to cut. And then these little squares are cut 2 inches. So that unit is pretty easy to assemble, and you're just making it a little faster by strip piecing the 4-patch units. And when you're all done, you'll have that unit sewn together like so. Okay, next I'm going to show you these connector units. So these connector units are all the same. There's 4 of them. There's one in the center that has no connectors, and what's cool about that is it forms a star when it gets all sewn together. So this unit is cut 3.5 inches square. So when I cut that 3.5, it just stays solid, and then these units are added with connectors. So she talks about connectors in the book, and that was on the first page of the book, and she shows you the process of kind of creating a connector. It's on page 3 of the Double Dozen book, and you're going to be sewing on a diagonal and then trimming away the excess. So let me just show you that real quick. I've got one prepared here. This is a small square, and those are cut 2 inches as well. And you're going to lay those right sides together, and you're going to mark a diagonal line. Now, a couple tricks with marking that diagonal line. I'm going to move this over here. If you've cut this 3.5 and you line this up even Steven with all those edges, in theory, if you mark a diagonal line that's 45 degrees, it should intersect those 2 points if you've cut them accurately. So a good way to check yourself to make sure you've cut an accurate square is to take the diagonal line on the ruler and mark it or line it up along the edge and then you'll mark your point. So I'm using a friction pen, and this is a pen that will go away with an iron. And when you iron it, it's just all gone. So if you've messed up your line, you can just iron it and start over. What you're going to do is you're going to sew exactly on that line, and then you will flip it over like so, and you'll have a connector unit. You want to be careful to sew from point to point so that when you flip it, it still lines up with the purple fabric. If it doesn't line up with the purple fabric, then it just wasn't quite flipped or sewn on the diagonal. This is an example of one that I've sewn, and when I flip it, if you look closely at the base of it, I have a little bit of extra purple fabric right along the edge, and that just means I just didn't quite sew it quite straight. So I'm leaving that purple fabric in the block so that when I sew it to my next piece, I'll use that as my guide. So those are your connectors, and they're like so. Let's talk about the flying geese unit, because that's what's left. So you'll make 4 connectors. You'll have that one in the center, and the outside pieces right here are called flying geese. If you're looking at the traditional block, they'll be red and cream. So the red is the dark. All right, let's break that down a little bit and show you how that's done. So you can do them one at a time, and that's referred to again in the book using the connectors right here. And those blocks are right here, fabric C and fabric B, C and B, and you look over at your cutting chart and you would normally cut that. Well, I'm going to cheat a little bit and make it a little bit easier. We're going to make 4 at a time and have less waste. So in order to do that, I'm going to use a technique using a block lock ruler to trim up my blocks, and I'm going to use this flying geese unit that's 1.5 by 3 inches finished. And I'll show you step by step how to do that. I found this page called the No Waste Method. It's published by Block Lock, and it shows you step by step and all the flying geese units that you can make from it. So it'll show you that you're going to cut 1 large square and 4 small ones. If you were to follow the directions in the book, you'd cut a lot more fabric, so this is eliminating some time and saving some fabric. It has a chart at the bottom to tell you where to follow the chart and what to cut. I'll just tell you what we're going to cut for this. We're going to make a goose unit that's 1.5 by 3, and we're going to cut 4 small squares, and this measurement says 2 5/8 by 2 5/8, and 1 large square, 4.5 by 4.5. So let me show you what those look like. So for this colorway, there's the 4.5 inch square, and then there are 4 2 5/8 inch squares. Okay? For the red and the cream, you would have 1 large cream square that's cut 4.5, and 4 2 5/8 that are red, if you're doing that colorway. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to set 2 of these aside and work with the large square and 2 of these. I'm laying them right sides together, and they should overlap in the center. When they overlap in the center, you're going to use your ruler again and mark. Again, I'm going to use that diagonal line, and I'm going to mark using a friction pen from diagonal point to diagonal point. Okay? Once you've marked that, you're not sewing directly on the line, you're sewing on each side of that line. So once you've done that, you'll have 2 units that look like that. I've sewn on each side, and then you cut them right down the center on the mark line. So you'll have these 2. Remember, you still have 2 of the dark pieces left that haven't been used yet. So what you'll do at this point is you're going to press this. And now while you press this, you're going to flip them up like so. So I'm going to just grab my portable iron. I have a wonderful ironing mat here that the heat doesn't transfer below. I'll tell you about that in a second. So you're just going to press that, and you have what looks like a little heart. Once you have that little heart, you're going to lay one of these squares on the first one, press this and lay the other one on this one. You're going to mark a diagonal line on that, so it'll look like that. Then you're going to sew a 1/4 inch on each side of that. Once you do that, you'll have 2 pieces like this. So there's my heart. I've laid the dark fabric down, I've marked the diagonal and sewn a 1/4 inch on each side. So you'll have 2 pieces that look like that. You cut right on the line and you have that. Then you're going to press this unit like that. So you will end up with 4 because this is just half of the heart. The other half of the heart will yield another 2, so for a total of 4. Now once these are pressed, you'll notice there's a little bit of extra around the unit. So that's where the beauty of the block lock ruler comes in, and I'm going to slide this aside so you can see that and lay it on my cutting mat. So I've got my block lock ruler and my untrimmed block lock unit. This is a trimmed one. That's what it will look like when I'm done. I also have a rotating mat so that this mat can rotate and I can move from one side to another. So I'm going to lay this down, and what happens is it locks into all the seams. They've got a 1/4 inch reveal, you've got a diagonal and a diagonal. And you trim off just this little tiny bit of fabric, all 4 sides, and when you're all done you'll just have this little bit of excess, but you will have a beautifully trimmed and perfect flying geese unit. You'll trim 4 of those down, and we'll go back to our block and show you how to put it together. So again, this no waste cutting chart, you could Google it. We also have it on the Sewing Palace website. All right, so now you've got to the point where you've got all your units done. You've got your 4 patch units that you strip piece, you've got your connectors that you sewed, you've got your rectangles, your squares, and then lastly your 4 flying geese. So what you want to do is you'll want to take this unit and sew it to that 1/4 inch seam. This 4 square that's sewn together will then be sewn to that, and then you sew those 2 together to yield a whole unit like this. Once that's done, you'll sew this unit to that, like so, and then you'll sew the row together. Then you'll sew this row together and do the same on this side. Once you're all done, this block should measure 12.5 inches unfinished. That means it's not sewn into the quilt yet, and it should measure 12.5 inches. If it doesn't, and it's a little short, that means your 1/4 inch seam may be a little bit big. So you want to just be careful of that and take your time making sure it's accurate. Let me show you a couple tools that will make your life a little easier. So this mat that I have here is a really heavily felted and dense wool mat. It's all natural, and it's portable, it's easy to use. You can set it next to your sewing machine. When you iron on this surface, the heat doesn't transfer underneath. So I do have a cutting mat, and you would never want to touch an iron to a cutting mat because it could warp it, but the heat doesn't transfer, and it's very easy to use. So these come in various sizes. This is one that would fit on your ironing board. You could also do a small one and be able to do small units in your block. It makes your blocks lay really, really nice and flat and sets your seams beautifully. So that's one wonderful gadget. The other wonderful gadget is this rotating mat. You will need some sort of cutting utensil. So this is a 17-inch rotating mat. So when you're cutting, you can use your dominant hand. Let's say I was laying this down and I was cutting. I could always stay on this side and just rotate it, move my ruler, and stay cutting with my right hand. So this is a wonderful gadget. You'll also need some sort of cutting utensil. This one is a 6.5-inch square from Creative Grids. I like that diagonal line. It has non-skid surface underneath, and I find it quite easy to read in the black and the white. So you'll need some sort of ruler. And to make those no-waste flying geese using the block lock method, you'll need this flying geese unit from Block Lock, and it's 1.5 by 3 finished is what it says on there. The other thing that was super helpful is a marking utensil. So this is a friction pen that goes away with an iron. You will just want to make sure you use something that's not permanent, and there's many choices, but friction's a nice option. And the other thing that you'll want is some version of starch. So when you get fabric off your kit, or if you've cutting from your stash, this is all beautiful, wonderful fabric, but it's nice to have it a little bit more stiff or starched, and Best Press allows it to get a little bit more strength or body without stretching and raveling, and it doesn't add white flakes. So I lay all my fabrics on my ironing board, and I spritz them with the Best Press, and then I iron that on so that they're all pre-starched before I start cutting them. So that's a great way to start. And then 2 other items, actually 3. You'll want a really sharp rotary cutter with a nice sharp blade that doesn't have any nicks in it. So if you have a nick in it, it's time to replace it. You'll need some nice thread snips. These are from Kaye, and they're very comfortable and easy to use, super sharp. And a good quality cotton piecing thread. This is an Aurifil thread that is makes less lint. So those are a couple of gadgets that'll make your life a little easier, and we'll be making a block every single month out of the Double Dozen book. This month is Good Cheer. So welcome and enjoy making your blocks. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.